And welcome to everyone who is joining us this evening. As Vanessa mentioned, I'm Stephanie Renee, Program Director and host of The Mojo on Word Radio, 96.1 FM, brand new in case you haven't tuned in a while, and 900 AM. And it is with great pleasure that I get a chance to help facilitate tonight's conversation. But I'm only going to warm the room up, and then we have an opportunity for you all to ask your own questions as well. And when I was offered the opportunity to lead tonight's discussion, I jumped at the chance to do so because this gentleman and I have some great history. Back when I was a young, fresh-faced, not yet ready to go into the professional world student at the University of Pennsylvania, I got a chance to take a class that was simply titled Blacks in Film and Television, and I had communications majors as roommates who had already raved about it. So I was a little late on the uptake, being a business major myself, but knew that this was something that I needed to add to my life. And it is because of Donald Bogle's class that I got a chance to explore some things that I thought I was relatively knowledgeable about, but had no idea about the rich history of blacks in Hollywood, about the struggles of how people chose to earn their keep and exert their gifts and talents, but were challenged at every turn to be the owner of their images, to project positive images. And the film that you saw some scenes from as you all were getting seated, Cabin in the Sky, is a film that I had not even heard of until I took Mr. Bogle's class. So this was the beginning of a whole new world for me to appreciate the stories, both the artistry of the people that we see on the screen and the backstories, the personal histories that make the journey so relevant. And that is what we intend to explore in brief tonight. But we hope that you will purchase the books, you will take them home, you'll read more into the stories that we just touch on this evening. But featured in Cabin in the Sky, of course, is one of the women that is known for purveying the blues in such an amazing way in our recorded, our sound recordings as well as on screen. Ethel Waters, yes, who has ties to the area just like you do.
Yes, very much so. What you saw, we had problems with the lights, unfortunately, so that image wasn't as strong and vibrant as it should be. But that was a clip from the 1943 Hollywood musical Cabin in the Sky. And I'll just tell you a little bit about Ethel because we're not going to be able to talk a lot about her tonight, but I did her biography, Heat Wave, the life and career of Ethel Waters, and she was an amazing woman. She grew up in Chester, and she'll tell you in a minute, I'm from Chester, don't mess with me. Also in Philadelphia, she got little more than a 6th grade education, and she was working as a maid in one of the hotels in Philadelphia. She had great ambition, but she didn't know what to do with it. And what happened with her, she was born on Halloween, October 31st, actually in 1896. And she was at a Halloween party at a little, it was sort of like a bar restaurant, and they had an amateur night where people would sing. And this was when she was about 19, 20. And she sang. And the room stopped. And they just knew this was an incredible voice. And that's how her career started. When she was a young woman, she was slender, sexy, and raunchy. And she was known as Sweet Mama String Bean. And she sang the blues and went on from that to sell a lot of records for Columbia Records. She crossed over. She later did the theater. She went to Hollywood. That brief scene you saw from Cabin in the Sky, she was older then, and she was heavier, and she was working with Lena Horne, this up-and-coming performer. And the thing about Ethel Waters, she detested Lena Horne. She really loathed her. Lena Horne made a big mistake as far as Ethel Waters was concerned. Ethel Waters, an early hit was Stormy Weather, and Lena Horne recorded it and had a hit with it. Ethel never forgave her for that. But you saw in that even though she's older and she's heavier, when she dances, she still knows how to move and still knows how to communicate with the audience. She really is not well remembered today, and that's one of the things in working on the biography of her that I wanted to do, to bring her back And right now they're talking in California, they don't have a star on Hollywood Boulevard for Ethel Waters, and they want to get one there. And Philadelphia should honor her more as well. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, you know, we learned so much of that. They said they were turning these off because of the hiss. So hopefully we'll project.
Yeah,
and hopefully you'll still be able to hear us. In an industry that has for a long time been very youth oriented, perhaps not as much as it is today, but for Ethel Waters to have this opportunity based on what you said around her birth date and when Cabin in the Sky was released, just as an example, we're talking about a woman that was in her mid-40s.
Oh yeah, yeah, very definitely.
And still being recognized for the talent, but having to deal with the struggle of remaining relevant and being honored in such a way to be able to be featured in these with an up-and-comer that she didn't like very much as a co-star. How would you describe that struggle for her as she progressed in her career?
Well, you know, her career, she always had to fight for everything, When she went to Broadway in the 30s in a big show that was basically a white show, and she was in it as a featured actor, but then she was very famous. Mm-hmm. And when they did the posters and so forth, the white stars, the primary ones, were put above the title, and they wouldn't put her name above the title. Mm-hmm. And she came on, she sang the song Heat Wave, which Marilyn Monroe sang many years later in the movie, but with all due respect to Marilyn, she couldn't touch Ethel's. But in the show that she did, As Thousands Cheer, she stole that show. Mm-hmm. And it became her show. So she was used to fighting, and with Cabin in the Sky, by then, you know, she was older. She was trying to hold on. She was a difficult woman, and she had a number of problems on the set. Mm-hmm. And she said that afterwards, because of her problems and her difficulties, she was blackballed in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. But she came back 6 years later. She did a movie called Pinky. And she was nominated for the Academy Award as Best Supporting Actress. First one since Hattie McDaniel in '39. And Oscar nominations for African Americans, that was it. Yeah. And it was going to be just a few years, it was going to take a few more years before Dorothy Dandridge got the big nomination. So she was able to make changes and to adjust. The funny thing about her is that, you know, as you saw, she got heavy, and she got even heavier. Mm-hmm. But she always felt she was sexy. Mm-hmm. And it was coming from within her. Yes. And so people seeing her, they, you know, well, she's still sort of a hot mama. I mean, Ethel didn't let other people define her. Yeah. She defined herself. Indeed. And that was one of her great gifts. Indeed. Well, more of that story, of course, is chronicled. And you can read all about it in Heat Wave, which we have here on sale today. And so weathering the storm, quite literally, in Hollywood, how that manifests itself in artists' lives, what they openly share with their audiences, with their fans, and what they struggle with personally, is part of what you say may have been the attraction and the friendship between Elizabeth Taylor and Michael Jackson, this need for nurturing. Very much so. You know, I was intrigued by both of them, and when they had this friendship, which was well publicized, although nobody knew what was going on with the friendship. They were called the Odd Couple, and she was 26 years older. Elizabeth Taylor had in total, she had 8 marriages. Yes. She married the same man twice, Richard Burton. Mm-hmm. But she had been a child star. Michael had been a child star. And what the book points out are these things they went through as children. I mean, it was really brutal for both of them. And they both were able to survive it. A lot of child stars don't. They fall by the wayside. And they were able to survive, and then into adulthood, they became even bigger stars. Right. You know, people tend to forget Elizabeth Taylor was the first $1 million star. No star before her had gotten $1 million for a movie. And she was, you know, many people consider her the greatest movie star of the 20th century, just as Michael is the greatest entertainer of the 20th century. And so the thing is that they had these similarities growing up, and the book tells a lot about their experiences growing up. And when they finally meet, and they don't meet until the 1980s. And I talk about the fact, I'm not going to go into the details now, people don't realize Michael Jackson really pursued Elizabeth Taylor. He really wanted to meet her.
Yeah.
And someone on the West Coast who worked with Michael, he said to me, he said, well, you know, everybody has to have somebody to look up to. No matter how big you are, you have to have someone that you look up to.
Yeah.
And she was the one.
Well, I mean, to me, that also goes back to this idea of Hollywood stories and how one might envision oneself as an entertainer. Because for Michael, you know, it's pretty well publicized that for the musical, his musical development, he looked up to James Brown, he looked up to Sam Cooke.
And Jackie Wilson.
Right.
Jackie Wilson was really, James Brown and Jackie Wilson, but Jackie Wilson even more so. But there's that famous audio, there's that famous audition tape of Michael doing a James Brown song. He looked up to all of the great Motown acts and other African-American entertainers. He really did. And one thing about him, he was in awe of great talent. He also was, you know, with Diana Ross. He had sort of a fixation on Diana. And he was crazy about Diana Ross. They were the great musical acts, and they would always, to him, be so important. Elizabeth Taylor was old Hollywood, and that was another thing, and he wanted to learn about it. What I have in the book, which I think you might find funny, is that he was interested in old Hollywood, and she was interested in these African-American performers. I mean, she was fighting to get an introduction to Stevie Wonder, and it had to be the right occasion, and she finally met Stevie Wonder. I have in the book, there's a picture one night, she went with him to a benefit for United Negro College Fund. And there she is with Whitney Houston and Michael. She went to the Soul Train Awards and so he introduced her to that, and she wanted it.
Yeah.
She really did. And he in turn gave her, she in turn gave him old Hollywood, because he loved stories about old Hollywood. And with, he also loved other child stars who had survived. I have in the book, you'll be able to read when he met Shirley Temple and what happened when he met her. And Spanky McFarlane. Do any of you? You're all children. You don't remember Our Gang, the Our Gang series. You're little toddlers. You don't know. But Spanky McFarlane from the Our Gang series, he was crazy about him, and met him, and later when he was on tour, he realized he was near where Spanky and his wife lived, and he went to see them. Spanky McFarlane couldn't understand it, you know, but Michael had that. Elizabeth Taylor gave him so much more, I mean, in terms of the old Hollywood. And then he was a wounded person.
Right. He
was wounded. And as I indicate in the book, and again, I'm not going to say much, but I think we all know about the Pepsi commercial when his hair caught on fire. And, you know, they minimized that in the beginning in the press. People didn't realize
just how
serious it was.
Yes.
And I talk about when they got him to the hospital, till then he was a vegetarian. He did not do drugs. And he was in such pain. He refused medication until finally he couldn't. And that was a turning point. For him. And she had chronic health problems, bad problems. Elizabeth Taylor once said, the people said, well, you have everything. You're the woman with everything. Fabulous jewels, homes, and all this other stuff. And she made the statement, those who the gods bless, they also curse. And she had lived with this agonizing pain all of her life. And they bonded over that. And you know, it was even said that which was not true, and again, I won't tell you too much because you're going to get that book, that, you know, there were members of the family that sort of blamed her for not so much encouraging him to take medication, but she understood it.
Yeah.
Why he needed it. And I have also in the book the family relations, how the Jackson family, how some of them responded to her, because the Jackson family was often, to put it mildly, it's an unusual family. But they really, the parents, Joe and Catherine, they always wanted their children with them. And they didn't so much like their children having these other relationships. With Diana Ross, they accepted his relationship with Diana. And with Elizabeth Taylor, she was so big they couldn't, even if they felt uneasy, they couldn't fight it.
Yeah.
So the book documents all of that. It documents also her trips to Neverland, when she would spend time with him. And they both felt they had lost their childhoods. And you'll see as you read that when she gets to Neverland, you know, Michael had all these rides and things around, and he delighted in, they were like children. Yeah. She loved to go on the carousel, and she didn't want scary rides. And they would go to the movies together. And they would sit in the back of the theater.
I was going to say, and we should clarify that we mean actually go to the movies. We know it's trendy now for people to have these very elaborate home theaters so that they can have the films come to them. This is not what we're talking about.
Because he said to her, he said, well, we'll get the studio to set up a private screening. She said, no, you're going to get out of the house and we're going to go. And they would go. Sometimes he wore disguises, but they would go and they would sit in the theater and hold hands. And a film that she really wanted to see was something called A Bug's Life, an animated film. And she just kept after Michael, that's what I want to see. And he sort of said, well, all right. But they really did have this, a recaptured childhood.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think is kind of fascinating about thinking about the context of their relationship and how Michael's career developed is that he is the first real super duper star of music videos, which were also his music videos were very heavily influenced by the Hollywood, kind of approach, whether we're talking about Thriller and the epic that was and the stir that it made at that time, or going to something like I was going to say Moonraker, that's the Bond film, Moonwalker, yes. With the old Hollywood kind of tribute. Yeah. So it feels like
and he put her in the video,
right.
Leave Me Alone. You see her in sequence, they're sort of clips from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof. So yeah, and Michael, he did love movies and he wanted to work in movies. He does The Wiz, but he didn't get to do some of the other things. But the videos are all terrific. I'll tell you something else about the videos, which is interesting. We hear Michael, people think that he has this very soft voice and everything. He didn't always talk like that. He didn't. When he wanted something, he was very shrewd with business. He made mistakes with business, but he was shrewd. Yeah. And when he wanted something, he let them know. And that voice was quite different. She also had a business thing. They shared. Elizabeth Taylor had her perfume empire. She did the perfumes Passion. They're still selling White Diamonds. Yes. White Diamonds is the biggest selling celebrity perfume in the history of these fragrances. And so they talked about business things too, in a more general way, but that too connected them. The other thing is, and again, I'm not going to say much because you're going to read about it, that when the darkness came in his life, and the scandals and the criticism. Right. And he had gone to Asia when he was performing, he was on tour, and he was sort of out of it. And he called her and asked her, would she come? And she was very ill. Her doctors were opposed. And she went. She took her husband with her, which was funny. And, at one point she got him into drug rehab. And another point, I mean, she stood up for him.
Yeah.
When other people were not. And he said he would never, you know, he could never forget that. The book also has Lisa Marie Presley in it. It has Debbie Rowe, all these people you know about. Debbie Rowe actually isn't as bad as some of you may think. I was surprised about Debbie Rowe, you know, these women really, Lisa Marie Presley, feisty woman, and she really cared about him. She really did. And she wanted to, she said, save him. And I have, you know, in there what happened in their relationship. And Michael's tragedy was a tragedy for these women as well, and also for his family.
Right. Really
for his family. No matter what we say about the family, they supported him, no matter what. There may have been conflicts in that family, but they did support him. And of course, he loved his mother, Catherine, deeply. Yeah. Deeply.
And let's talk about, you know, you mentioned the strength of their relationship and you know, influence, perhaps positive and negative, when it comes to managing the drug use and other things that come along with celebrity that seems sort of par for the course. I wonder your thoughts on managing the evolution of what has turned into the 24-hour news cycle. Because it was a little bit later in Elizabeth's celebrity, but it was really as Michael was coming into his own as a solo artist when we started getting the TMZs of the world and all of these places that really wanted to dig up all of the dirt that might exist in your life and share it with the world. Elizabeth had to navigate that in a different kind of news cycle through the marriages and what have you. But your thoughts about how she might have mentored Michael through the lawsuits and all of the accusations?
Well, you know, the thing about, because she had, you know, Michael had all sorts of lawsuits against him. And she had lawsuits. And they handled things differently. And I think that she tried to get him to handle it in another way. You know, she became, if you see Elizabeth Taylor in the movies as a young woman, I mean, she was called the most beautiful woman in the world, and she was exquisite, and she was delicate. As time went on to survive, there was a hardness that set in. And she did curse like a sailor, too. But a hardness set in. Michael had it, but what he hadn't yet developed, because remember, he died, she had almost a 30-year longer lifespan than Michael. Yes. So some of the changes he might have gone through later, he just didn't live long enough to deal with them and sort of let some of it just, you know, you know, just to ignore it. And so she, you know, she tried to give him that. But I'll tell you, the two of them, when they would appear together, I mean, the media went crazy. Right. And you had all the photographers, the cameras, all of this stuff on them. And both of them, in a way, didn't like the media. They felt they were treated unfairly. But when they were together, and those cameras are going off, and people were screaming for them, I think they loved it. I think they loved it when they were together, because it was something that each felt no one could understand except the other. Is that the weight of the titles? Queen of Hollywood, King of Pop? You know, as king and queen of your respective industries, having that general understanding. Yeah, very definitely. Very definitely. They were on a level that few other people get, and that they were aware of one another's fame, and I think, quite frankly, they enjoyed one another's fame. I think that came into it as well, and they enjoyed one another's glamour, and they enjoyed one another's sort of power. So that, you know, was another thing about their relationship. I want to get ready to open up the floor for questions for those of you who I'm sure have many. But as we now are dealing with the shadow of these amazing legacies that they've left behind, how do you envision history will treat them
within the context of the friendship, as you are describing in the book, rather than individuals. I think it'll be easy to sort of parse through the Hollywood legacy of an Elizabeth Taylor and the musical legacy of a Michael Jackson. But is it your hope that your book will help people to have a lasting context for the strength of their relationship?
Yes, I would hope so, because they are, in a sense, I mean, it was the platonic relationship, but it was a love affair. Mm-hmm. And it was one of Hollywood's great ones. Mm-hmm. And so in that respect, I mean, we hear about Spencer Tracy and Katharine Hepburn, or Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, these great sort of couples. This is a unique couple. I do think, however, that their individual legends, each is mythic, mm-hmm. and those are so strong that those will probably, you know, be stronger individually than their joint. But there will come a moment where people will really look at that, what happened with that relationship when the two came together and what they discovered in one another. I'll say one other thing about her, is that, you know, she was always, and this applied to Michael, she was always looking for something, eventually as time went on, bigger than herself.
Yeah.
And she was always, she felt that, you know, she was always valued for the way she looked. And she came to detest that. You know, Elizabeth Taylor got heavy at different times. Mm-hmm. And then she would lose weight and come back. But to be valued, and I found this with Dorothy Dandridge, primarily for the way you look, and not for people to see what's inside you.
Yeah.
And she was looking for something bigger than all of this. And I think that the friendship with Michael was that. I also think that her work with AIDS, that she gave herself mm-hmm. to that. This was big, and something had to be done. Michael was moving in certain directions, but he didn't get there. And the really tragic thing, which I deal with in the book, I mean, this was the really tragic thing with him, was after that trial.
Yeah.
And the trial was a joke. He was innocent of that. I mean, and he was acquitted, rightfully. But that really broke him. I don't think he was ever again the same person.
Yeah. Well, because you brought it up, I would be remiss if I didn't stay with that for a moment, because this idea of lost childhood is something that we as a society don't necessarily encourage. You know, I think that we generally treat adults that after you've reached a certain point, generally 30 is the standard mental cutoff, that you're not allowed to go back and reclaim anything. You're at the age of maturity and you move forward. The idea of how we punish, in some cases, people for bucking against our expectations of them seem to be fairly weighty, as you've just described them, for both Elizabeth and Michael, wouldn't you say?
Yes, very, very much so. Very much so. I mean, with him, though, there really was an attempt to recreate that lost childhood, mm-hmm. which you really can't recreate it.
Right.
You can go back and have some of it. And Neverland was, you know, part of that. And, you know, again, I mean, as time went on, who knows how he would have developed. He had, you know, he was devoted to his children. Mm-hmm. And so he would have, I'm sure, matured in other ways. He just didn't live long enough. But no, it was that lost childhood, that it was an ache in his heart. She had it, but she said something interesting. She talked about, you know, the problems she had as a child actress and so forth, and everything that happened. And she said, but you know, I wouldn't have changed any of it.
Right.
And he also did say something along those lines, that he would have still, with what he lost, he also got something in performing as, you know, as a kid, and, you know, yeah. and becoming a star then.
Yeah.
So.
And if he hadn't endured what he endured, would he have been the same kind of performer?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, the floor is now open for your questions.
Yes. I understand in making National Velvet, Liz Taylor hurt her back, and she was plagued with that for years and years and years.
Yes, she was. She was played with. She did. She was thrown off the horse. National Velvet. She plays a little girl who. It's interesting. She has a horse. They put him in a race. The jockey can't run, and she decides to do it. It's an interesting comment on gender roles. And Mickey Rooney's in, and she wins the race. Yes. And when they find out she's a little girl, they take the title away from her. But that movie is saying, and it was something that stuck with her. Really, in basic terms, a girl could do anything a boy could, or a man could with the jockey. But no, she did have an accident, and that was one of the things that she had back problems all her life. She had other, excruciating pain. Last 2 years of her life, both of her knees were broken, and they had to lift her for everything. Deanna, you had.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
Woods, to the city of brotherly love and sisterly affection. Donald, we're very proud of you.
Thank you.
Yay. A three-parter. What precipitated your interest in doing this particular love story? Did they ever consummate the relationship, or was it strictly platonic always, even though there was an age difference? Some men like older women. Mm-hmm. And what is your next project?
Well, the last one I can't answer. I never talk. I'll tell you eventually. When I'm working on something, I'm very superstitious. I don't say anything till it's done. I don't even tell family members or whatever. But I am working on something. But as far as what was the first part? I know the second part.
What precipitated your interest in
Well, like everyone else, I was curious about their relationship. And I saw even then these connections in terms of the way they had grown up and all this other stuff. And so I was interested in doing something. And then when Michael died, 2009, I talked to my agent in New York, and I said it would be interesting to do a book on Michael and Elizabeth. And my agent wasn't much interested. And I talked to a former agent about it, and he says, well, it's good, but no, they weren't showing enthusiasm. Then when she died, I got a call from my previous agent, and he said, now's the time to do that book. And then the current agent said that. So the two of them had to work on my book deal together. My current agent, she didn't particularly like it, but they did. But one of the things that when she was gone, if it had been done when she was alive, there were things she didn't want really out there. She was a very private person, despite this life, lived in newspaper headlines. So it was then that I could go forward. Their relationship was platonic. That does not mean he did not see her as a sensual woman. It doesn't mean that at all. But I think she looked at him as it was a maternal attitude. So it wasn't, it was a romance, but not romance in the way that we think. Yes. If you see them together at certain things, he's all lit up when he's her escort. He just loves this. And when they would be in restaurants and so forth, he loved getting the waiters to, well, she wants this, and he just loved that whole thing when he was with her. I don't know if he was always that way with Debbie Rowe. I think that, Debbie had to assume that role. But with Elizabeth Taylor, he really loved that part of it. Yes?
I remember when I was a kid, she used to go to Europe for sleep treatments every so often. And after I grew up, I wondered if it was really sleep treatments or, it was for weight loss or something. What was that all about?
It was, actually, she did go to, spas and things too. There were periods to, to lose weight. Now, she did, which I talk about in the book, that, she did go to the Betty Ford Center. Yeah. No, I know it is. But one thing about her, which was unfortunate, as a young woman, she drank. Even before she met Richard Burton, she drank, and she could handle it. But as the years went on, the drinking increased, and this added to her problems. And ultimately, she, you know, she had to give it up. And she was in the Betty Ford Center twice to try to, you know,
That's around the time she came out with the perfume.
Yes, exactly. Because when she came out, she lost the weight and everything, and launched the perfume line. She knew with the perfume line, look, you know, she had to sell that perfume. And so, you know, she didn't want to be valued just on her looks, but she knew she had to get out there and she better be looking good. And so she lost the weight, and she actually did department stores. That she went to Macy's in New York and other stores, and people flocked to see her. So one other thing I do want to say, that some people now, another generation, sees her as a celebrity. She is not just a celebrity. She's not Kim Kardashian. She isn't. Elizabeth Taylor won 2 Oscars.
Right.
She was nominated for the Oscar 5 times. And there were other performances they said she should have been nominated for that she wasn't. Have you ever seen Giant? Yeah. The movie they showed on TCM with Rock Hudson and James Dean. They got nominations. She didn't for that, and people felt she should have. But anyway, back to what you're saying. She did go through these things, you know, to lose weight at different times. She did.
Don,
yeah. Yes.
Astrologically speaking.
I'm not telling you too much, am I?
No. Astrologically speaking, Liz was a Pisces.
Pisces.
And Michael was a Virgo.
Yes.
There's a natural affinity between those two. And I'm wondering whether or not that probably played a part between the two in terms of his sort of like being totally in awe of her, and her having that esoteric thing about her in terms of his attraction. And the other thing, I just wanted to ask you one brief question off the book. What are your top 3 favorite Black movies?
Well, I know my top. I don't know if I can give you all 3. Number 1 will always be Carmen Jones with Dorothy Dandridge. It will always be that. There are others. I like Boys in the Hood. You know, I've seen Boys in the Hood many times, and it's because I didn't show it in your class.
No,
I show it now. And Boys in the Hood, I've seen it so many times, and each time I'm emotionally affected by it. You know, the ending with Ricky and so forth. And that film was done in '91, so it's 20-some years now. I interviewed John Singleton on the anniversary of the 25th. I didn't tell him, I told him I was affected by it, but I didn't go into all of that. But I would say Carmen Jones, Boys in the Hood. Oh, there are a number. Because now I'm going to give you another, but and I'm sure later I'll remember something I should have added. But I think Do the Right Thing, Spike Lee's film. I really do. That, and that film still has power. So, so those are among the ones. Carmen Jones will always be number 1 for me, yeah, because of her. Yeah. That's it? Yes. Well, the children, she had 4 children and 2 cesareans of births, and she adopted a 4th child. And one thing about the children, it had to be hard for them to deal with her fame and everything. But her children were very supportive of her. They really were. And when she was dying at the end, her children were all there. She had 10 grandchildren and at least 1 great-grandchild.
Any relationship with Michael?
Huh?
Did the children have
They knew Michael. And, you know, that was the thing that, you know, Michael was like the 5th child in a way. He was.
Yeah.
And at that point, they just, you know, they accepted it. I mean, one thing about them, which was very hard, and they made a statement about it, I mean, that they had to share their mother with the world. You know, there were many times they would have wanted to just have her, as you know, and they did. But they, you know, they really, from what I have seen, they loved her. They loved her deeply, as did Michael's children love him. I mean, little Paris and Prince, and I guess little Blanket, if he could remember. And Michael was a devoted father. But no, her children, Elizabeth Taylor's children, did very much love her.
I remember a quote from her around the time Brittany, whoever she was running out. She's married to Kevin Federline.
Yeah, Britney Spears.
Britney Spears.
And I remember reading Elizabeth Taylor said, "You got children? You got to go out every night?"
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, I know there are a lot of people that want to purchase the book and read for themselves, and I know our time is limited, but I wanted to ask, along those same lines, one final question about Hollywood in the here and now. Looking at Elizabeth and Michael's careers separately, one of the things that we don't seem to have a whole lot of these days in feature films, with the exception of the Oscar-nominated La La Land, are the vehicles that, like A Cabin in the Sky, where you had these very prominent recording artists who are now in the Hollywood realm and they're giving us these big production numbers. Do you think that Hollywood is sort of ripe, especially with the success of La La Land, to perhaps revisit that era where sort of Elizabeth Taylor's celebrity and Michael Jackson's interest first came together?
You mean that era to do, or?
Yeah, the big
that,
musical
you know,
pieces.
I think one thing that the musical, we still have musicals, but they changed. Straight Outta Compton is a
True.
musical.
It is.
I mean, we don't think of it as a musical.
Right.
We get the music, but it's not like La La Land, which
Right.
is hokey, but enjoyably so, where
Yeah.
they start to sing to one another instead of talking. So I don't know, something like that could happen again. I do like the use of music in black films, and you know, there's some films, even Quentin Tarantino. I think it was Jackie Brown that he did with Pam Grier. The soundtrack is fabulous. He has
Right.
all of this old music that he brings in. So musicals have been different. Whether we're going to see something on the order of La La Land, I don't know. And we want to remember, La La Land did not win
Right.
the Oscar.
Right.
We want to remember that. Moonlight did. So.
Well, this has been an engaging discussion, and I can't express my appreciation. He's a very busy man.
Well, thank you, Vanessa. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
3 short questions, because he's got to get on a train to get back to New York, and I'm sure all of you people want to get on to read your books. Yes, ma'am?
Why is it that Michael's worth is so much more now with him being dead than he was when he was alive?
Well, you know, it's something, it happens with other ones that where they're worth a lot more when, you know, when they die, because people suddenly realize we're not going to have them anymore. And people stop, and they, that music, I mean, Prince is sort of like that too, that people, you know, we're just not going to have them now. And so Michael had such problems that now, you know, people see Michael this great, you know, again, they see him as this great entertainer without this cloud over him. And the music. I'll tell you this also, and I'll make it quick. He was a very shrewd businessman in terms of what he controlled with the music.
Right.
I did a book signing in New York. We did a big signing. Disha, one of my former students right here, was there in New York. We had a full house at Film Forum, and we wanted to show Thriller. We showed Cat on the Hot Tin Roof with Elizabeth Taylor, and we wanted to show Thriller. And the Jackson estate wouldn't let us do it. And they were controlling it. And the theater went through a whole thing, you know, well, you know, the book is not critical of him. It's a very sensitive look at him. And the family wouldn't. But what it indicated was he controlled those rights. Michael did. And when he died, then it, you know, the rights went to the estate, and basically, you know, with his mother and his children. But he was very shrewd in that respect. Yes.
Didn't he buy the rights to the Beatles?
And,
Yes, he did.
and Catherine sold them.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was all negotiated. I just also wanted to say to you that that's part of the Michael was also very expensive in terms of lifestyle. That, you know, so of course those expenses don't transfer with you once you're not incurring them completely. The touring and his lifestyle were very expensive. So as he passed, you have the publishing value, which means that his music will continue to generate money for generations. And so the value of his estate will jump dramatically when you're making all of that money off of the performance of the songs and the playing of the songs on radio and what have you, without the added expense of the touring and the home maintenance and those things.
Yeah.
Final question here.
Tell us briefly about Eddie Fisher and Elizabeth Taylor. What happened there?
And that's briefly.
I'll make it brief.
Briefly.
And if someone asks Elizabeth Taylor, she'd probably say, I'll make it brief. That Eddie Fisher was her fourth husband.
Philadelphia.
Yeah, he was from Philadelphia. Nicky Hilton was the first, heir to the Hilton family. Michael Wilding, an older actor. Mike Todd, fabulous producer, killed in a plane crash.
Yeah.
You know, her life, you couldn't really, you know, you couldn't do fiction in this way, all these things. Then she marries Eddie Fisher, and I'll just say this, Eddie Fisher was from Philadelphia, and he's the father of Carrie Fisher. And Elizabeth Taylor was Carrie's stepmother, and I have in the book about their relationship, you know, her father left her mother, Debbie Reynolds, for Elizabeth Taylor.
Yeah.
Carrie, as she got older, could not wait to meet Elizabeth Taylor. And they developed a friendship. And Debbie Reynolds said, it was very interesting, she said that she felt in her later years, the fact that Elizabeth was friendly with Carrie, that Elizabeth Taylor felt guilty all those years later. But she also became friendly with Debbie Reynolds in later years. Yeah, from Philadelphia. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.